Hello everyone and welcome to another Total War information video. In this one we're just going to be talking about the Ogre Kingdoms and a wee bit speculation, a wee bit sort of just talking about them. They are not going to be an initial faction in the game, but they are one that I am very interested to see get implemented at some point. We know all the major races, well, playable races, are going to be in the game some point. See, I've said that. So they will be in the game at some point. For all I know, they might not be in it for 3 years. They might be added in some sort of DLC a few months after release. But they are the faction I am most interested to see get implemented at some point. For a couple of simple facts. One, their infantry, their basic infantry is like half like elephants, half like infantry. We've seen the trolls and how they act. Well, imagine larger units of trolls that are more intelligent, who fight intelligently, and like can have shields, but they're, well, Iron Fist, which is like a shield and a weapon combined, and great weapons, heavy armor. Yeah. Then imagine lots of different types of these guys and stuff like that. You're starting to see why I'm super interested in them. So I'm going to start off, and let's think legendary lords to start off with. Their race leader is a pretty simple and easy fact. That has got to be Greasus Goldtooth. I've never particularly liked this guy, and I just can't put my finger on it. I think it's just the way how lazy he feels, because this guy's carried by like 1,000,000 nobblers into the battlefield, which is, a nobbler is a bit like a goblin, but they follow the ogres instead of the orcs. He will be a very powerful character though. This guy is supposed to be literally the only thing that loves gold as much as a dwarf, and apart from the dwarfs is probably the richest person in the Warhammer world. He would be incredibly powerful when he gets his ultimate magic weapon against monsters and their ilk, because his weapon basically works like a cannon. Not a cannon you shoot, he still swings it in melee combat, but it damages like a cannon. So that weapon will literally be like, bye bye monsters, because imagine getting hit by about 3 cannonballs, just like whack, whack, whack. Yeah. It's like takes accuracy out of it, just straight swing it into the monster and they're going to be dying. Pretty much the fact that he is a monster himself. He's incredibly tough. He has that much money, he likes to bribe his enemies as well. So I wonder if they'll be implemented anyway. Because say in the tabletop he's got this where he can choose a certain number of opponent units and give them the stupidity rule. And that's supposed to represent he's bribed them to be a wee bit more, we'll hold back. He's not bribed them enough totally that they'll join the side, but they're like, I'll maybe just stretch my legs a wee bit. Oh, now we'll slowly get moving into the action. And so he's bribed them to sort of be like that. Not enough to betray their race, but enough to just slow them down. Apart from that, I see this guy just being a monstrous sort of lord. He'll probably work a lot like Karl Franz without wings when he's got Deathclaw. And that's another thing that's got me really interested in this, because I see Ogre Kingdoms, their heroes and their lords, being overpowered compared to other races' heroes and lords at the beginning, but when the other enemy when the other races, heroes and lords, start getting powerful mounts like Deathclaw getting, Karl Franz getting Deathclaw, then I see them starting to be more powerful. So it's kind of like an opposite now. So Ogre's Kingdom's characters start off stronger, but are weaker high rank comparatively. That's how I see it working anyway. On to their second legendary lord, and I would expect that to be Scrag the Slaughterer. This guy is a mage, essentially. He is their named character Slaughtermaster or Butcher, which is what the Ogre Kingdom's magic is. Now the Ogre Kingdoms get their own magic lure, which is another reason I really like them, because I find it absolutely hilarious. Ogre Kingdoms as a race worship consumption. Their god, the Great Maw, is pictured as a giant mouth, all-consuming giant mouth, and they're scared of this. They think one day their god is going to come back and consume the entire world and the race, and that's one thing that terrifies them. Their lure of magic is also to do with consumption. Their mages are butchers and slaughtermasters, and when they're casting spells, they're basically eating something. I like to call it the magic sausage, but if you actually read the lure and stuff, it's not normally a magic sausage. It's like some troll guts, which is actually the name of one of their spells, or like chewing it and casting the spell at the same time. So it's not really touched upon. It could either be a method of channeling their magic, or it could actually be they're drawing magic from the consumption somehow. It doesn't really describe how their magic sort of works in the lure from what I've seen, but that is how their spells work. I've seen other ones where they like have some sort of bone and they're crunching up in their mouth and doing stuff like that. Their magic is mainly augment spells, which is sort of like buffs, like they can make their allies stronger and tougher. But they do have a few spells, like their ultimate sort of spell that I see working very similar to Curse of the Bad Moon that we've already seen, except it doesn't move. Their ultimate spell is called the Maw, which is like huge toothed chasm appears in the ground and just swallows a huge chunk of their enemy. So I see it being similar to Curse of the Bad Moon in how you do it, but you don't need to worry as much with it, sort of thing, because you don't have to worry about it jumping back and hitting your own men. So maybe it doesn't. It's a smaller area, so less risk, less reward, sort of thing going on. But back to Scrag the Slaughterer. Yeah, this guy is quite strong in melee. Well, he is an ogre, he's a monster himself, and the more he slaughters and throws into his cauldron, the actual stronger he gets. And a unit he specialises in having with him, which is the Gorgers, which are sort of ogres that have been cast away when they were child, sort of Spartan style, because they're malformed, or they're the weaklings, the runts, and the ones that somehow survive and have been like starving in caves. They're like uncivilized, sort of ghoulish, cannibalistic. Well, all ogres are cannibals, but you get what I'm trying to make you picture here. They're sort of like that, and they can be very sort of aggressive. They're animalistic compared to ogres. Ogres are not animalistic. They do have intelligence. I'll say they're about the same intelligence as a human, but their intelligence works in different ways, sort of thing. They don't put their mind towards society, they just put their mind towards eating and getting one up on their allies, sort of, so to speak. But yeah, that's Scrag the Slaughterer. Now, if they were going to get a third legendary lord, there is only two other named characters from the army book. So if they're just drawing them from the army book, the last two choices could either be Brag the Gutsman or Goldfag Maneater. Now, personally, it's no contest. Goldfag should definitely be the third legendary lord if they're keeping it to the same style as two legendary lords and one DLC legendary lord. If they're keeping it to that sort of style, Goldfag should definitely be the third or the second, maybe even before the Slaughterer. This guy, I think, would be really, really interesting to get in it. He is basically the ultimate mercenary. He goes around with elite ogre troops called man-eaters, which their whole purpose in life is to go around being sellswords to make a quick buck. Now, with Goldfag the man-eater, this is highly unlikely, but I still have high hopes. Very unlikely high hopes, but I still have high hopes for the Ogre Kingdoms getting a look in somehow earlier on than one of the standalone expansions due to him. It wouldn't be a stretch to say Goldfag Man-Eater is heading towards the Empire to try and make a quick buck with his man-eaters for a profit, as you would expect. Now, this guy could appear as like a really legendary lord mercenary. How cool would that be if just somewhere randomly on the map he travels around looking for someone to hire him? His upkeep would be astronomically high, so it'd be really hard to get him. But if you got him, wouldn't that be so cool? It'd be like the ultimate mercenary unit, and you could get him, and once you've got him, you got access to some ogre units. Well, that'd be one hell of a DLC worth paying for. My only worry would be that it'd be that rare, you'd only really be able to use them in custom battles reliably. But I think that would be very, very cool indeed if he did work a bit like that. Then when Ogre Kingdoms were introduced, maybe you could have him playable as by default then. But as I said, it's very, very unlikely. I just think it'd be very cool. Now, Goldfag himself doesn't have much in the way of his own unique magic items, but what he does get is a very unique special rule where he gets to generate a certain amount of magic items himself at the sort of start of every tabletop battle, because he's supposed to have been such an awesome mercenary for such a good length of time that he has this huge collection of incredibly rare magic items that he's just sort of accumulated. He's either been given them as his reward for his mercenary contracts, he's stolen them, he's taken them from fallen foes, you name it, he's done it kind of thing. And so he's sort of like, I feel like this huge sword that makes me stronger today. Or, I'm going to take this old orc war boss's axe, because it's really good at cleaving through dragons or something. I don't know. But I could see him sort of having that sort of random aspect. Like every time you take him to a battle, he's got like a different loadout of magic items just randomly on him. And maybe some of his skills can be him acquiring more better items, so his assortment is generally better, but still random when he brings it to battle. I just think Goldfag Man-Eater would be an awesome choice for a legendary lord. He could have some sort of buff to Man-Eater units. It's just Man-Eaters are loved by the Ogre Kingdoms community, so no wonder this guy is loved, and I personally see quite easily why he is loved. Over Bragg the Gutsman, he was the fourth possible. I personally don't know much about Bragg the Gutsman. I know he is very good at killing. He is probably the most killy out of the four legendary lords, unless he's up against something like a giant or a dragon. Because then you go back to Greasus, and he's the better option. So that's the legendary lords, and what I think they'll be sort of like. Mainly Goldfag. Gotta have Goldfag in there. So let's talk about their stereotypical lord choice now. The Tyrant. Tyrants are a lot like orc war bosses, but they're ogres, and they're called tyrants for a reason. They rule not from being, well, they are the biggest and the strongest, but the others don't follow them because they're the biggest and the strongest. They follow them because they're scared. Tyrants bully the rest of their race. That is why they're called tyrants. If another ogre speaks out to them, the tyrant is very, very likely to go up to that ogre, rip his arms off, and eat them in his face. Tyrants will be incredibly tough and killy in close combat. So much so that, well, let me describe this bit of lore for them. Tyrants, for fun, barehanded wrestle with giants and come off the better. So, that's the kind of people we're talking about here. It's an ogre so large, strong, and tough and skilled. He wrestles with giants. I think that pretty much says it all. And that's when he's barehanded and no gear. And he's doing it for fun. It's not as though he sees it as a risky maneuver that he has to undertake. It's for fun. Another interesting thing about Tyrants is not all of their upgrades in the army book are items. There are actually some title upgrades, because ogres often, well, they have their first name, then their second name is descriptive, like many things in the Warhammer world. Gracious Gold, whatever, I've forgotten it right now, because he loves gold. Olag the Drunken, obvious reasons. Now ogres are very much like this, so they actually have titles, so maybe there'll be some sort of upgrades in their tech tree like that as well, because it is actually a large part of the upgrade system. In the codex there's actually one that makes them stronger, for example, and it make them much more killing in close combat, and there's others that make them tougher. And then obviously they've got their equipment on top of that. So these tyrants are monsters as well, remember that. They're not just uber killy, they're monsters. Now the other lord type, if they do get a lord spellcaster, level spellcaster, something you should know about ogre spellcasters, because they are ogres, they can normally take on the enemy close combat lords in close combat, especially if they're outfitted pretty well. Unlike most mages in the Warhammer world, practically apart from vampires are the only other ones that are mages that take armor. And Ogre Kingdoms, their mages have armor. So they're incredibly durable spellcasters. I don't know if you have seen the Karl Franz trailer where the mage gets chewed up by the wyvern. That ain't happening against Ogre Kingdoms. If that wyvern charged the ogre, he would have probably bounced off his belly and then got slapped in the face. Yes, the wyvern would probably come out better in the end, but oh boy, that wyvern would be losing an eye or something, and that's just the spellcasters. And we've already talked about the magic. Now, when you're scaling down to the lords, there's not that much different. You go from the slaughtermaster to a butcher, from lord to hero for the spellcasters. There's not really much to talk about, it's just a weaker version. And the tyrant goes to a bully. The only thing I'd like to mention here for bullies is that think of an army sort of structure where the officers are there just to bully. You get your bullies. Simple enough, isn't it, folks? Right, I've got my army book here to make sure I don't skip units or anything. So we're going to talk more about their core units, as they're called in the army book now. Obviously, their most core of their core is your basic ogre unit. They hit like a steamroller. In fact, they have much stronger charges than cavalry in the tabletop, so I would be very surprised if they don't have that sort of represented. Their charge has much more impact than the trolls we have seen in the tabletop. In fact, the trolls in the tabletop don't even get a charge bonus. It's just because this game's more realistic, it's added their mass. Now, Ogre Kingdoms are sort of like the masters of using that mass because they've got the intelligence as well as the mass, and their charges are just devastating. And your first thought on these ogres is, oh, they're big, they're tubby, they're probably slow. You're going to be so dead wrong. Because they are so tall, Ogre Kingdoms are incredibly fast compared to other armies. Their infantry moves at about 1.5 the speed. So these basic ogres, though they're not as fast as cavalry, they're not much slower, and they're going to hit like a freight train. We've seen units of about 6 trolls. Well, these ogres are going to be 20, 30, 40 unit size. But oh god, they're going to be so expensive. That is the downside to Ogre Kingdom's armies. They're unit for unit, maybe, well, man for man, they may be the strongest thing in the game. Certainly troop wise. But they are so expensive. Their armies are always going to be outnumbered. The dwarfs are going to have huge numbers compared to ogres. Just to put things into perspective a bit, I'm going to describe their basic troops in a way I've described them before. An ogre, I could say, is probably like 50% elf and 50% soldier. So people that have played Total War, how scary can elephants be when they're charging into your lines? That's what to expect. And another way that I'm going to describe them is, see if you're playing the tabletop and an ogre gets hit by a cannon, there's about a 1 in 3 chance that ogre's going to live. That is how tough these guys are. Like, they take a cannonball to the belly, they live a third of the time? Yeah, these guys are going to take a tremendous amount of firepower to take down, but remember, they're incredibly low numbers compared to other races. That is their basics of the basics. They can get upgraded to have, well, obviously your most basic ogre just has his sort of belly plate armor, which combined with their toughness is actually quite, I expect them to have quite a good armor value when it relates to Total War. Then they can instead of getting a shield in brackets upgrade like the other units you see like spearmen, then spearmen with shield. For the Empire roster, these guys will have, oh, I forgot the name of it, Iron Fist. You'll have Ogre, and then Ogre with Iron Fist is like the tier 2 version. And this Iron Fist is basically a shield the shape of their fist on top of their fist, with blades and that on it. And obviously, because of the size of an ogre, that is a perfectly good shield against 90% of troops. Maybe not against troops their own size, like trolls, but against Empire State Troopers, that is going to be perfectly good as a shield. And it doubles as one hell of a weapon. Right. They are, well, we've seen Black Orcs for Orcs and Goblins. The next unit is like the Ogre equivalent. They're called Iron Guts. These guys have huge two-handed weapons and they know how to use them. They are like the cream of the crop Ogre society wise. They're like the tyrant's best troops. He has then since outfitted them with lots of armor plates, heavy armor, and these huge two-handed weapons. These guys, they're just so strong compared to regular ogres. They have really high toughness and armor. I expect them to be really hard to kill in game through basic small arms sort of means. They'll be really tanky, and if they come into contact with an enemy monster, they're going to be carving up that damage really fast because they're such high strength and they're two-handed weapons. I expect them to have a huge armor piercing sort of trait, ability, stat, whatever you want to call it. Now we've talked about Iron Guts, we've talked about the Ogres. Now I think it's time to talk about something a little bit more runty. Ogres have a very, very large society following them around that are basically goblins that are slightly smaller with bigger noses and a slightly different hue of green. They're called nobblers. These guys cling to the ogres for sort of protection, sort of unknown sort of reasons. They're, how to word it, they're allowed to live by the ogres for the simple fact is the ogres find them incredibly amusing and there seems to be an endless supply to them. So when the ogres get bored or frustrated, it's like, oh, let's chop up some nobblers. Seems to be an endless supply of them in ogre society, just sort of squirming to the ogres, trying to eke out a living beside them, underneath them, just using them for sort of protection, you could say. Now expect these units to be huge, sort of cannon fodder, like making mobs look strong, sort of thing going on. You very rarely see people that are playing the army from a competitive sort of standpoint in the tabletop, but you often see them sort of a fluffy perspective. Because whenever the ogres go to war, there's a huge following of nobblers following them round and just causing havoc. One thing they love to do is just hide behind the ogre lines and sort of hurl broken glass and tiny stones. So I don't see them taking a sort of slinger sort of approach. Imagine more javelin range with like half of a slinger's strength and damage. That's how good their ranged abilities is, but that's what they often like to do. And the other thing they do is obviously just mass, gnaw at the ankles, take down those enemy soldiers. That's the other thing they really do, but they're not really even good at that. It does add a good way to add a wee bit of numbers to your ogres though. Protect, maybe, I don't know, flank, try and make your ogres harder to kill so they can just chew through your enemy. Because they'll be chewing, but your enemy will be chewing back, and your low numbers, you really don't want to get into war attrition with ogres. You want a massive charge and just to rout your enemy really fast and rely on your really tough units not going down. But once your units start to fall with the ogres, I see you starting to lose really fast. You need to... The orcs are masters of blitzkrieg on the campaign map, but I'd say ogres would be more masters of blitzkrieg on the battlefield. So that's us talked about the core units as they are in the army book. I'm moving over to special units, and we're going to talk about a favourite of mine first. The Lead Belchers. Now, these guys are ogres that have taken a look at some dwarven cannons and said, I respect that. That thing is huge and powerful, and it makes a lot of destruction. Let's steal some. Or we've just kicked some dwarfs, but let's just loot their cannons and take them around with us. So now imagine an ogre unit walking around, slinging cannons like a rifle. Now before people scream, oh my god, that's like a unit of 20 cannons or 40 cannons, whatever the unit size is, constantly blasting. Ogres don't have the dwarven know-how, and so they just sort of cram them full of gunpowder and full of any spears and anything they find, so they use them more like shotguns, cannon shotguns. The devastation they can wreak on an enemy line is huge. They do very large splash damage. I see a unit of lead belchers firing at a unit of... In fact, you know a good way to describe them? Those iron drakes from the dwarven battle. What was it called? The one in the underground. Oh, I can't remember its name right now. But if you've seen that, the dwarven iron drakes have the flamethrowers. I see them doing a very similar role to that. Like, units just melt in front of them. Like, not huge range, not bad range, not huge. And units of goblins and units like that just melt and disappear. Units that are tougher and have lots of armor and all that, they can absorb the punishment. Like, this little tiny shrapnel just bounces off them, they take damage but not a lot. But lightly armored units just melt. So I really am going to love those lead belchers. They will do quite a lot to help combat your low numbers. Another unit is the man-eaters. We've already talked about man-eaters a wee bit, so we're not going to talk about them much more. Man-eaters are... I'm not sure how they're going to be represented in game unless they give them lots of different types of man-eater units, because this is a unit that if you played them in 40 battles, you could probably take them a different way each time. Unless they make it a bit like Goldfag. Ugh, I'm getting all the names wrong now. Unless they make it a bit like that legendary lord for them. It's random. But that doesn't make much sense, because the reason it's so variable is because the man-eaters sort of travel around being mercenaries, and they sort of pick up on the way their paycheck fights, basically. I'm trying to think of a way there. Whoever's paying for them, they sort of pick up and learn why they fight well, and sort of go, ooh, we're going to use that. So you can have one unit of man-eaters that, like, one of my favourite models for the tabletop is a ninja, and he's a ninja man-eater. Yes, just think about this for a second. He is an ogre ninja. Then you could have other ones that have lots of pistols and are like bang, 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 bang. They're a very good ranged unit. So you can see this unit has a lot of variety. There's models for a pirate one, there's models for a baker one that's a female. Very funny model, that one. You wouldn't want to meet her in a dark alley. Trying to remember all the other models for them off the top of my head. I don't remember any at the moment. But yeah, this unit is has lots of ways to take it. So I'm really confused on how they do that. But they're definitely a must. Like literally people's favourite unit. My favourite is lead belchers, but most people their favourite is the man-eaters. They're very expensive though. They're a very elite unit. Now, the next one I want to talk about is a wee bit weird. And the fact is, I don't know how they'd implement this one either. It's saber tusks. Oh, talking about the saber tusks made me realise I've missed a hero. Ogres have a hero called the Hunter, which is basically a bully that is a loner, and he basically likes to hunt large animals, so he'll be very good at taking down sort of rare monstrous creatures like Deathclaw and other griffins. He'll be very good at taking them down. He carries around a ballista and uses it a bit like a giant harpoon launcher. Well, that's just one way to outfit him, but yeah, that is another hero type they'll get. They'll probably play the sort of scout role of the heroes for them on the campaign map, but in battle they'll be like a monstrous creature hunter. And the reason saber tusks made me remember him, which I'm glad because otherwise I would have forgotten about him, is that hunters don't like to be around other ogres. They like to come in time to time to the ogre camps and sort of talk to them, catch up, sell their huge monstrous creatures they've hunted, that sort of thing. Then they like to leave and be a loner in the woods and wilds again, just sort of a free man exploring, hunting creatures. But they do quite like the saber tusks, and they often like to roll with saber tusks. In fact, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure in the tabletop they're only allowed to join saber tusk packs, not ogre unit packs, which makes them a bit of a lone wolf, and that's why they're not often taken. Because lone guys die pretty fast, and you can imagine in a huge army. But saber tusks is a weird one, because I don't know how they'd implement them. In the lure, saber tusks like to follow ogres around. They're sometimes pets, but they mainly like to follow them around because they're like the ogres, they like to eat. And the ogres always lead them to the good feasts. So they sort of like follow the ogre armies around. When the ogres chop up a load of people, they like to see if they can get in on the action and reap some of the reward. In the tabletop though, people normally take them in units of 1 so that they can, well, so that they can use them to sort of manipulate the enemy, force them to move their unit here because they can't charge the unit behind because they've got to charge the saber tusk. There's all sort of gimmicky reasons that they're taken. But they are quite good stat-wise. In Total War, I could see them being quite strong. Either, I don't know, army ogres will generate a certain amount of saber tusks that sort of follow them around, or maybe they'll work like dogs, which doesn't really fit the lure, but there's a question mark on how they'd implement them. Because it's debatable whether you should get control over them. You definitely get control over them in the tabletop, but that doesn't fit the fluff. Hunters could have control over them. They normally always have them as pets. But yeah, it's a question mark. Stat wise, they're very similar to an ogre. They're not as tough. They're basically like a less tough ogre. They're like, imagine it's basically tigers but a bit more beefy, and with sabers, fangs. Yeah. The other thing they're often taken for is for arty hunting in the tabletop, but again, that's not really their fluff sort of thing. So yeah, I'm not sure how they do that one. Right, on to the next unit, and that is Yetis. This is the unit, if there was going to be one left out, with the saber tusk, I could see them quite easily being left out. Maybe DLC, later date or something like that. They're basically ogres. They're basically like a cross between ogres and trolls, but frosty. They're stronger though. They're stronger. They do more damage than an ogre, and they've got magic ice sort of aura weapons, and have like an ice aura around them that like slows opponents. That sort of, they've got those sort of rules. But they'd be very small unit size and very expensive. And I'm not even that sure on their fluff. I can't remember how they come into it. If they obviously come from the same mountains as the ogres, but I can't remember much about them. Now this next unit is one. If you fought Lead Belcher, sounded scary, or you fought Iron Guts, sounded scary. This next unit is going to make you wet your frilly pants. An army of monsters. That's pretty terrifying. What if I told you this army of monsters had cavalry? I'm just gonna let that sink in. And I don't mean plain old, I've got a horse cavalry. I mean effing huge bear-like things that are bigger and tougher than demigryphs that are ferocious and terrifying. Then they've got an ogre on its back. What the hell? If an ogre hits like a freight train, these things hit like a freight ship flying into you from the sky. Oh yeah boy, those guys. Mournfang Cavalry. The Mournfang is like this huge sort of bear lion thing that lives in the mountains, and the ogres, some ogres go out and they go to the tribes and they do this sort of alpha male challenge thing, and they have to tire the Mournfang out, and if they manage to stay on the Mournfang's back, some sort of story like that, the Mournfang will eventually accept them and they'll take them away and they'll be his mount. Sort of breaks them in. And I'd just like to note the ogres normally die doing this. So this is how scary the Mournfang is. Yeah. Just mauling things to death and godly charge. Mournfang Cav, that definitely have to be like a tier 3. They'd like level 4 barracks and say like to recruit they'd be monstrous. That'd be like your ultimate unit. And I expect there to be multiple types. One's for like great weapons, one's for the shield. Just very scary. Their last, I think it's the last, yep, their last sort of special unit, as it's described in the army book, is the Gorgers, which are the things I described earlier for Scrag the Slaughterer. They like to follow him around because of his cauldron of blood, like attracts them, and they like to just go to the battlefield and gorge themselves on enemies. There's not much more fluff to them than that. They're rarely, very rarely seen unless you're playing Fluffy in the tabletop. And they're rare-ish in the fluff. And once again, it's not something you should really have control over. You get control over them in the tabletop, but just like the saber tusks, they sort of follow you around, just waiting for the chance to gorge themselves. So maybe if you've got Scrag the Slaughterer, you get a wee bit more control over them. But maybe it should work a bit like the WA, how they get the free AI army. Something like that, where they're like AI, but they're more very simple AI. Like they charge the nearest unit and just try and eat it and like chase it down and do stuff like that. More animalistic instead of thoughtful on what they do. That'd actually be quite nice. They're a really good way to implement them actually. I think that would be quite good. But then how would you cover them? Maybe you've got a sort of like, instead of a WA meter, or what was it they called it? Fightiness, they've got a gorginess. When you get high gorginess, you get lots of units. Gorginess, it sounds like gorgeous now. When you've got a high meter like that, Gorgers and Saber-Tusk packs start following you around and helping you in the battlefield. That sounds quite fun, but again, we're just speculating here, folks. I'm basically just got my army book in my hand and I'm going through the units and just letting myself dribble to give you guys that know nothing about the fluff, the sort of perspective on this army, and why I think they'll be really interesting to play. One thing is, a lot of these units sound very powerful, and remember they are very powerful, but as I said before, very, very expensive, very low unit count, very low unit numbers. Yeah, they're the ultimate elitist army. Well, depends what you mean by elitist. The troops are elite, not someone that's like, oh, I must win, playing as gimmicky as possible. I don't mean like that. I mean man for man, they're the most elite army there. Now we're getting on to what's described as the rare units, and there's quite a few tasteful units in this section. The first of which is a Nobbler, a Nobbler scrap launcher. Oh, ugh. A few stomach problems there out of nowhere. This Right, let me describe. Imagine, well, you don't need to imagine. You know the great woolly rhino from like prehistoric times. In the Warhammer world, they're still around, and they live in the same mountains as ogres. And there is actually a unit even more terrifying than Mournfang Cavalry from Forge World, which is like the Uber, like Games Workshop, super expensive company that ride them. But we're not going to go into that because I doubt we'll see Forge World models. We might, as DLC later on, get some really rare Forge World models, but they are supposed to be really rare. The Rhinox Cav would be like they're like really scary Mournfang Cav, but we're not going to talk about them because they are basically a monster. I'm talking about them now. So the Rhinox Cav would be a Rhinox is literally like the size of Deathclaw, so that is how scary that unit would be. But they can come in units of one, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were implemented that they were in units of one or something like that, or even just 3 of them. Oh yeah, because I'm thinking tabletop size, they're normally like 1, so Total War size you'll probably get like 3. They're obviously not as good as Deathclaw, but they're about the same size as Deathclaw. That gives you a wee bit of perspective. Right, back to the Scrap Launcher though, because the Scrap Launcher is pulled by one of these, and it is basically a chariot and a catapult combined. So you're getting an artillery piece that is also scary on the charge, and we're not talking Total War chariot scary, we're talking mini elephant and chariot combined scary. Yeah. And that Scrap Launcher has a big brother. Not chariot size big brother, but you thought cannons were big and powerful for the Empire and the dwarfs. The ogres actually get a bigger cannon. Seems a wee bit counterintuitive at first thinking of that. It's like, how can they build bigger cannons? The answer to that is they don't. Like their lead belchers, which they originally stole dwarf cannons after a battle, and then started buying cannons from the Chaos Dwarves and getting them other ways. But the Iron Blaster is actually stolen from a long dead race. When ogres went to their homeland, they're in the now, it was originally colonized by an extremely rare, there's only like 6 of them in the world, kind of rare race called, I think it was Sky Titans. It was Sun Titans, I'm pretty sure it was Sky Titans. Now these were like large giants, but with the intelligence of the smartest elves and the smartest dwarfs there is. They had their own castles in the sky that they built themselves, and they were loners, they didn't live together, they lived on their own, and they had huge flocks of, I can't remember what it was, some sort of goat thing like a rhinox, about that sort of size, and they were a bit like shepherds. That's all they wanted to be, like shepherds up way high in the mountains. But the ogres were like, oh my god, if we bring those guys down, we'll have food for a year. So you can guess what the ogres did. And for once the ogres fought these huge wars, laying sieges to these single man castles for a long time, until they eventually did kill the race out. But because this race of Sky Titans, as they're called, were incredibly smart, they had guns. And imagine a pistol to them. How big would that barrel be? It would be like a huge mother effing cannon to every single race in the Warhammer world. So now if we put 2 and 2 together, I got to this story by saying the ogre stole cannons from somewhere, and you put that story I just told you together, you should get the conclusion that these sort of pistols they had are the cannon barrels for the second chariot, also pulled by a Rhinox. And the cannon has like a grape shot sort of mode and just one solid ball sort of mode. So yeah, that's why I called it its big brother, because there's a big difference between a cannon and a catapult, but they're both sort of they're both chariots as well, incredibly powerful in the charge. So you're going to get very good multi-use out of those two units. Blast away at them as you walk up to them, dealing devastating damage. The cannon could be aiming at other monsters that are going to absorb the damage from your monsters. The catapult can be more trying to take out numbers, and when you get close you can change the cannon to grape shot, try and weaken them a bit, doing a similar role to the lead belchers. In fact, it would probably be like an upgraded lead belcher with less unit wide damage but a larger blast radius for a single shot, if you get what I mean. So working with the lead belchers, you can deal devastating damage to their numbers and maybe make it a bit more even. So yeah, then, even after all that, send them round the flanks once you have engaged them and get another devastating charge out of them. So yeah, multi-role units are going to be really good there for the ogres. That's why I think those two units will be pretty powerful. Now here's another unit in the rare section that we've actually seen before and is already implemented in the game that we've seen, and that's the giant. Orcs aren't the only ones that can field giants. The Ogre Kingdoms can as well. In fact, I'm pretty sure Empire could at one point. I don't know if they still can. Well, I suppose Age of Sigmar, no one can anymore, if you're going by that logic, but yeah. The giants should look different though, because ogre giants are slaves, and well, I think the orc ones are technically slaves too, but you get what I'm trying to say here. There should be sort of, it should be the same unit, but it should have like a different skin, or a different set of skins that it can generate from, and how it looks. And now, we've talked about how this whole army is monstrous, very large, very scary. But, like every race, the monster race has a monster that is, well, technically the Mournfang and the Rhinox Cav are monsters raiding monsters. But for them, that's just like a basic cavalry. That's not, to them, it's not monstrous, it's not huge. They do get two units that are monstrously huge for them that don't work like cavalry. It's like Karl Franz on Deathclaw. Not for their generals don't ride them. The hunter hero can. You can ride one of them. But they've got units that are monsters for them in the form of the Stonehorn and the Thunder Tusk. One is basically a woolly mammoth from your nightmares. It's huge, it's like a woolly mammoth yeti thing. There's like a couple of ogres riding on its back. I expect it to be like an ogre version of the Ragnarok spider. The other, the Stonehorn, is very similar in size and scale, but its flesh is actually made out of stone. This thing is so tough that cannons barely hurt it. It is a monster that puts the toughness of monsters to shame. They are obviously going to be very late tier. They're sort of uber expensive units, and they're kind of like everything in Warhammer. There's got to be something over the top, because the rest of this army is all monsters. A normal monster loses its lackluster, so you need a monster. That's what these guys are for. They're like their equivalent of dragons, but obviously they're not as strong as something like a dragon ogre or a dragon. They're nearly though. They're uberly tough, uberly expensive, uberly strong. Tabletop wise they're not, but fluff wise, oh my god, they're overpowered. That's us been through all the units in the army book and one from the Forge Worlds. So now I'm just going to talk to you a wee bit about their race, because we've talked about their magic. Their race used to live somewhere else, I can't remember where, but a huge cataclysmic event happened to them. A great maw opened up and like ate most of their race, and they became migrants for a long time because their homeland was no longer safe for them. And that is when they went and found the home in the mountains they are in now, and killed the Sky Titans, obviously. These mountains are off to the east of the ones we seen. There's, well, the ones we see in the campaign map. So there's another area similar to the Badlands to the east of the map, then after that there's more mountains. And that's where these ogres herald from. And an area sort of roughly, I'd say about the same amount of mountains that are in the whole of the campaign map, leading from the Chaos Waste down to like the watery area, the oceans and all that in the Warhammer world. And that's where they occupy. And this race, at first glance, looks a lot culturally like the orcs and goblins, but they're actually vastly different. Their whole structure is based off bullying and greed, whereas orcs just care about fighting. They follow the best fighter because he's going to lead them to the best scraps. Ogre kingdoms follow the most ruthless guy that's probably going to hurt them if they don't, kind of thing. And they're incredibly greedy. Their whole society is based off greed, and it's mainly for food. These guys just want to consume and consume and consume. I could see if they were going to do my mercenary idea, them having a sort of horde maybe aspect to them, because they come hording through looking for grub, looking for that. But if they go back to their homeland, they act a lot like orcs. They do have their societies, their areas. They go to tyrants ruling over them. They're obviously not that civilized because they don't care about being civilized. Very much similar to the orcs in that respect too, but they do have their sort of cities and their... Calling them cities is a bad way to word it. It's more like, well, what you expect of the orcs. You're going to have to call them cities, aren't you? Because I can't think of another way to describe them. They're sort of forts, they're sort of areas where they sleep and that sort of stuff. But very bloodthirsty sort of race. And whoa, this video is an hour long nearly now. I intended for it to be, I don't know, 10-15 minutes. But that is really going over the race in its totality, how I expect their units to be, and just talking about them. So I hope you have all enjoyed this. If you want to see more videos like this, please say, or if you just want me to stick to the official information we're hearing, I'd be glad to do that as well. Hope you have all enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.